Walter Suskind. This is a man with a professional, sphinx-like quality who can show the part of his face, of his character, which he decides to show to you.
I didn't want to have anything to do with this man because I thought he was on the wrong side.
There will always be people who Suskind was not able to help because the situation simply was too dangerous.
Imagine hundreds of people in the Hollandse Schouwburg every day, and you can only save 10.
And there will be many, many others who owe their lives to this strange and secretive man.
My impression from him was only as a good man, which I could give my life in his hands. Mr. Suskind was the one who cared for everything. He saved me.
We all live with a false sense of security, as Dutch Jews did at the time.
Jews had lived in the Netherlands since the Middle Ages. Holland, a small country about the size of Massachusetts, and that it was a democracy, it still is.
Dutch Jewry was concentrated in 3 towns, Amsterdam, Rotterdam, and The Hague.
They were mostly literate, had important business relationships.
The Dutch Jews were assimilated. They spoke Dutch, they did not speak Yiddish.
Amsterdam was such a wonderful city, and we were so very happy there.
I have to say I was completely unaware of what was coming.
There were, of course, reports in the papers about bad things. Kristallnacht in 1938 in Berlin, all kinds of pogroms in Germany going on. I said, well, that can't happen in Holland.
A lot of German Jews came fleeing Germany.
Holland opened up all its borders, and if you were lucky and had a passport, you could just go over the border.
In 1938, a young Jew named Walter Suskind had lost his prestigious job with Lever Brothers in Germany.
Walter got problems in Germany. I said, yeah, Walter has a very good job, and because he was Jewish, there are no jobs for Jews in Germany.
Because his father was Dutch, Walter was fortunate enough to have dual citizenship and a Dutch passport. He and his wife Hannah were able to flee to the Netherlands, where they thought they would be safe.
I have to admit, even though that's a pretty horrible thing to admit, that we considered them as Germans, not as Jews. We made fun of them.
In spite of this attitude, Walter made his way easily and created a new life for himself in Holland. He quickly found success as a salesman.
He had that gift of being a personality who could talk to people. And quite sure that once he made friends and once he sold something, people would be loyal to him.
He was really a self-made man. Was not somebody who was very well educated, but he was a very successful salesman.
We still talk about his beautiful car. When he blew the horn, you could hear it through the whole town.
In March of 1939, Walter and Hannah became the proud parents of a baby girl named Yvonne, and their new life in Holland seemed to be going well.
And then, of course, things changed drastically.
In May 1940, the Germans invaded.
Or the early morning of the 10th of May 1940, we heard the sirens for the first time, and we knew something was wrong.
From the 10th May of 40, I had a terrible fear.
We got up, we heard shooting, and we turned on the radio, and we heard that the Germans had invaded the Netherlands, Belgium, or France.
Flights of unopposed German bombers flew low over the center of Rotterdam and methodically bombed it into a heap of rubble.
The bombardment in Rotterdam, I witnessed that. Saw the bombs falling and the Germans coming in.
The Queen said that there was no way in which the Dutch could hold on, and she was leaving to go to England. And I remember that my father took the radio, threw it on the floor, and started crying. It's the only time in my life that I ever saw my father cry.
Hitler appointed the Austrian Nazi Otto Seyss-Inquart as Reichskommissar to govern the occupied Netherlands. All Jews in Holland who thought they were protected by Dutch neutrality now found themselves trapped.
At the outset, there was anger to this German occupation.
You saw the German people marching with their hateful black shoes and singing these horrible German songs.
I'm a Dutch citizen, and all of a sudden the Germans started putting a wedge in between Dutch citizens who were Jewish and Dutch citizens who were not Jewish.
It didn't change from one day to the other day. It just went gradually.
A lot of the things that followed about Dutch Jews was mostly published in Jewish newspapers and not in regular newspapers, so that the rest of the population could say, well, we didn't know what was happening.
They used the newspaper to announce every new step.
I remember I couldn't walk on the sidewalk. I had to walk in the street. You couldn't go on the tram.
Couldn't listen to the radio anymore. Couldn't ride bicycles. Pretty soon, Jewish children were not allowed to go to school anymore. Our school became the infamous SS headquarters.
Jewish people who had an account at the post office were not allowed to keep that. They couldn't go into the cinemas.
We would say, what will happen next?
And then we got identity cards. And the Jews had an identity card with a J on it. The Dutch word for Jewish, Jood, J-O-O-D. So the J was on it. So now we had the identity card and the stars. We had to wear the Jewish star, the Star of David, with the word Jew in Dutch inside of it. And we had to wear that on our outer clothing. So people, everybody could see us being marked that way. And we lived with it. We went along with it. And of course we didn't know what the end of the line was, so we went along with it. We could handle it as long as they let us breathe. Little did we know that in the end they wouldn't let us breathe.
The Dutch people were conflicted in their response to the new regime, which they viewed not as military occupation, but rather as a new form of government. The Dutch had always prided themselves on being a tolerant and law-abiding people.
In April 1942, a bicycle was stolen, which is not uncommon in this city, be it that it was Anne Frank's bicycle. Typically enough, Anne Frank went to the Amsterdam police only 3 months before the deportations started. Anne Frank regarded the Amsterdam Police Department as being a department which was able to protect and to help her.
Why do you obey the laws? You obey the laws because it makes it a safe, predictable environment. And you trust the government to help you and be on your side.
As the Third Reich continued to implement its plan to impose anti-Jewish measures and rid Holland of Jews, the Nazis forced Amsterdam's Jewish leaders to assist them.
The Germans used a method whereby they selected prominent Jews, and they were to appoint a whole group of people who would fulfill certain functions that basically would make it easier for the Germans to organize the Jews in such a way that they were ready to be picked up and sent to concentration camps.
The organizational form in which they forced Jews to help them was called the Jewish Council.
The Jews that lived outside of Amsterdam were made to move to Amsterdam.
They were very vulnerable because they were living so closely together. It was simply so easy from a German police point of view to arrest Dutch Jewry. Simply pick them up and put them in a train.
And I walked in the streets. People would tell me, "Don't take that street, they're picking up people there. Don't take that street, be careful." And I found my way, and I was always very fortunate and very blessed when I got home and saw my parents.
You didn't ask where people were, because from day to day there were fewer people. You didn't ask if they had been picked up by the Germans or had gone underground.
I saw them going into the cars to go to the train station and to who were transported.
In 1942, when the razzias had started, they started picking up Jews here and there, but then it became worse.
I was sitting next to a friend, a Jewish friend, who was called from home that he immediately had to come home. My friend left and I never saw him back.
When the Germans came, you hear the steps. And then I saw my mother walking on I tell you something what I never thought. She was walking on her knees to the window to look out of the window if they came. You know, and that was one of the things I always have before me.
Then there were, of course, the raids at night.
All the noises and the dogs, and it was unbelievable.
They took my mother and my old aunt out of the house, and I was upstairs. I came down, and there was a seal on the door. I couldn't go in. So I broke the seal. I went into the house, and I took my cello, and I broke them. That was the only thing I did.
I was an only child. I was 5 years old when the war started. I went into hiding with my parents for more than a year in about, I think, 10, 12 places.
Dutch families who were discovered in hiding were immediately arrested and brought to a collection site to be processed.
We were all three taken to the Hollandse Schouwburg in Amsterdam.
Hollandse Schouwburg.
Hollandse Schouwburg, the Dutch theater, which had become the Jewish theater, the only theater the Jews could go to at that point, was closed. The seats were removed, and that then became the first stop on the way to the concentration camps.
The Schouwburg, in fact, was a sort of detention camp. It's a sort of concentration camp, albeit with better living circumstances, which is placed in the eastern part of the center of a city.
Now, in 1942, the deportation started.
Groups were brought in by a truck or police car. When they came in, they had to register.
There was a line of tables where typewriters stood, and the people of the Jewish Council registered the people. when they came in. You had to sleep in the same room, of course. There were mattresses who were set out in the evening.
People would lay down and it was horrible. The smell there, it was just hell.
People were crying, people were upset.
I remember where my parents had to sleep on the floor on a little mat, and it's near a certain pillar. It was terrible, of course, frightening.
Once a day you were able to go outside in the backyard to get some fresh air.
In a small theater, there were only a few bathrooms, there were no facilities to wash or to do anything. Yet this theater was filled with people every day, from people who were taken from the street, from their houses, sick, old, everything.
Dutch Jews who were brought there as prisoners simply could not cope from a mental point of view. They had been respected citizens for many, many years. And now everything, including their self-respect, was taken away by the fact that they had been arrested as if they were criminals.
While the Jewish Council, working under strict orders from the Germans, continued to manage the deportations, a small but powerful resistance movement emerged in Amsterdam. Walter Suskind, hired by the council to manage matters at the Hollandse Schouwburg, was one of the movement's leaders. Over the next 18 months, he would turn a fledgling undercover plan into a large-scale and well-orchestrated covert operation.
I began to notice this man by the name of Walter Suskind, who was one of the higher-ups in the Jewish Council.
He was small, broad-shouldered, yes, and always running, with papers in the hand, and yeah.
He was also the right man in the right place. His upbringing also must have contributed to the idea that you should not stay an outsider and just let things happen. His mother was Orthodox Jewish, as far as I know. His father was a bit more liberal.
We know that the father was a poor man. It was a poor family with 3 brothers. And they took another child, an orphan child, so it was 4 brothers.
And he had very strong notions about morality in terms of helping other people.
Everybody liked Walter because he was so gentle.
He was a very, very sympathetic man. You could tell him, you can ask him, and he had always time for you.
He was a very open man, friendly man.
Oh, Walter, he was very sweet. He was a friend. He was really a friend.
He must have also had this kind of feeling of adventure.
So he was a good talker, a salesman. He could motivate people as a leader.
And he knew by heart the way of thinking of the Germans.
He was so friendly with all the Nazis there, the guards and everybody.
He was the one who spoke German. He was the one who could deal with the Germans.
This was his job, to be there and then use his talent, his German and his salesmanship to do the best he could.
As Walter took his place as the Jewish head of the Hollandse Schouwburg, he had to answer to the Nazi authority. Ferdinand Austerfunten was named the commandant of deportation, in charge of eliminating the Jews from Holland.
I've not a very nice memory of his being in the Schouwburg. He came in like an emperor, and he was surrounded by escorts. Yeah? Not only SS, but also Jewish escorts. Yeah?
Austerfunten is a former bookkeeper who has discovered that being anti-Semite can do your career good.
Walter Suskind acted like he had known Austerfunten in a previous time long ago in Germany and acted like it was an old friend that he had lost and was so glad to see. And apparently Austerfunten bought into that.
His big boots were shining. He must have polished them every day. I mean, it was a typical German in charge and a criminal. That's why the relationship with Suskind was so unbelievable to us.
What he did with Austerfunten was unbelievable.
Just singing. I heard them sing a song in German together, drinking.
He went drunk with him. And he absolutely did it on purpose. I think this saved him.
Most of us, not knowing, thought he was a traitor.
I remember him coming to the Schouwburg, and I thought, that Jew is going to Austerfunten again.
There was an ability to negotiate with Austerfunten that Walter became more and more crafty.
In order to be a hero, Suskind had to be polite to the petty Germans. He had to make sure that he remained modest, calm, charming, that he did not overplay his own cards.
So he had this horrible task to have at least two faces. At least two faces. I think he had more faces.
What we in fact here are seeing is an actor.
He was acting. He was acting all his life, I suppose.
Austerfunten trusted him. They couldn't believe that a German, even a German Jew, could betray him. But he did.
Across the street from the theater was a creche, the Dutch word for childcare center, that had been in existence for many years before the war.
While being in the Hollandse Schouwburg, the children had to stay across the street in a creche.
The creche.
The Germans didn't like the screaming of the children, therefore there was the creche.
Children 15 and younger were separated from the parents upon arrival at the theater.
The head of the creche at that time was Henriette Pimentel, who was an absolutely wonderful, wonderful lady.
Mrs. Pimentel was the director of the creche. We were all in awe of her. She was very lovely. She was smart, was very kind, also very strict.
Mrs. Pimentel gets, for me, all honor for what she did there. She was always out to save children, to take them here, take them there. That was really quite something.
At the beginning of the war, I was 8. On August 13, 1943, my mother and my aunt and my father, everybody was taken, but I wasn't.
Because Rosie had scarlet fever, she was left behind by the Germans. She was taken to the home of a family friend.
And so they took me to their home. And that was the first address where I was. But I didn't feel it safe at all. And they were afraid. And they brought me to the creche.
They took my mother and my old aunt. They came home and to fetch her, and I was hidden in the house somewhere. And afterwards I was taken by a family, Mr. and Mrs. Phillips. And then the 5th of May, on my birthday, I became 16 years, they catched me. They fetched me officially from the house of Phillips, and they brought me to the Zentralstelle für jüdische Auswanderung. And there Austerfunten took me apart and forced me to say where my parents were. And I said they have already gone to Germany. He didn't believe it. He hit me anyway. I was sent to the Schouwburg. And in the Schouwburg there was Mr. Suskind who took care of me. He brought me to the creche on the other side of the road, and there I was living for 5 months.
Mid-42, the order came from the Germans that beds had to be placed in the creche and the children had to sleep in the creche.
There was a very big room with all babies laying in the small beds.
My name is Fred van Vliet, and when I was born, my name was Fred Schachner. I was born in Amsterdam, and at that time I was with my mother and father, Salomon and Rachel Schachner. In May 1943, my father is picked up from the street. I was a child of 5 months.
Solomon Schachner was arrested for being outside after the 8 p.m. curfew. Fred's mother, Rachel, made the decision to give her baby to a neighbor while she tried to find her husband. Fred's parents never returned.
She decided to give me away to friends. She knew something when she gave me away that perhaps they don't come back. I think she knew already that there was something very terrible going on. A neighbor of the family betrayed us and went to the police and said, well, there are Jewish children in that home. The girl and I were brought to the creche. I stayed there perhaps a couple of months.
The Germans paid a piddling sum of $7 per Jew reported in hiding. That's what our life was worth.
I was 2.5 years old when I was taken out of the creche. As a child from that age, you don't quite realize what's going on. I don't even remember that my parents left me. I was taken away from my parents, and that was it.
Children of all ages arrived at the creche, many having already lost their parents. A group of young women worked to make the children's lives as pleasant as possible.
Young women, nurses took care of us.
We were sleeping with 14, 15 children in one large room. And at evening we toasted bread on the stove. And that's the only thing I remember.
The food was, I think, poor. I also remember one day the children got a handful of sugar to eat.
It was an indescribable situation because you were laughing and dancing and singing with the children, and at the same time everybody was taken to the death camps.
Oh, we had laughed also. We had also pleasant times there. It was not all heavy and terrible in the creche. No.
You went for walks with the children, you played with them outside, you sang with them. Did I sing? Ik heb een roosje op mijn hoed en dat roosje staat me goed.
And the kids had a good time with us. We did everything we could for the children.
It was kind of crazy. You tried to be cheerful and there was nothing to be cheerful about.
You knew there were Germans there. There was another one, Klingebiel, who was also a lower level German, who stood there, a big fat guy who screamed at me always, and I screamed back at him.
Klingebiel was a terrible man.
I had all my kids sleeping, and he came with about 20 people. He came upstairs with their boots, and I screamed at them. I said, will you get away? Will you get out of here? Look what you're doing. You want to wake up those little kids? And off they went.
Children staying in the creche had to rejoin their families in the Schouwburg when they were deported.
We had to take the children at night to the parents. And 3 times a week trucks would come in front of the Schouwburg, and we would know which parents were going on transport.
And the children were always completely quiet, as if they knew that they had to be. Didn't talk or didn't ask anything. And I held them tight to me.
How was it that the children were so quiet? That is something incredible, because we ourselves didn't understand it. I think they were so full of fear that mostly they were very, very quiet. And when we took them downstairs in little groups to take them to their parents, those children were white in the face. They didn't give a kick. We fed them, we dressed them, we hugged them, and then we had to give them across the street and knowing they go away.
That was the first time that I came there. And I came into the entrance hall. And at that moment, the kids came downstairs from the staircase. Down the stairs quietly, not talking. And they passed by me and across the street. And I still get tears to my eyes when I think about it. Because it was like they understood. They didn't know, of course, but it was as if they understood what was happening.
The fate of people who were shipped on from Westerbork was very questionable, very questionable.
Westerbork was a transit camp in eastern Holland. Jews who were transported from the Hollandse Schouwburg went first to Westerbork. From there, they were shipped to concentration camps in the east.
You should never forget, there was no factual proof. There was no objective way of actually knowing what occurred in the camps. And people could be highly optimistic and highly pessimistic at the same day. It was not unusual when a Jewish family would sit together and discuss what had to be done, that in the same family, people would say, in the morning, it's best to behave in a so-called legal fashion. Let's go to the transit camp. Members of the same family would be absolutely convinced that it was a necessity to go into hiding in the afternoon, and in the same evening, there would be a solid majority for going to the transit camp. These are dilemmas nobody can ever handle.
My parents didn't hide. They said, well, we have to do it and we have to follow the rules.
Every Tuesday, the transports left Westerbork to the east, to Auschwitz, to Sobibor, to Theresienstadt, to Bergen-Belsen, to all the different concentration camps.
Nobody had anything in mind what would happen.
You were told that you were going to go to work. I mean, there was no inkling of what was waiting.
The mere thought that there would be mass destruction was, from a psychological point, unbearable.
Rather than face the uncertainties of deportation, many Jews sought to escape the Nazi regime while still in Amsterdam. Walter Suskind and others conceived a series of strategies for saving Jews at the Schouwburg and the Creche, for which they enlisted the help of resistance groups.
Nobody was really prepared. It wasn't as if at that time already there were resistance groups organized.
I was a law student, so and I stopped in '42 with my studies. I thought it's crazy what I'm doing. I'm studying, and things are happening, and I didn't want to study anymore.
It was for me new that raids and razzias were going on. Suddenly I was more inspired by this kind of work, because that was very active and with much planning and perhaps some adventures.
We
looked for a man who could help us. And so the relationship was built between the Schouwburg and our men.
All these resistance fighters had to improvise, just because there were no rules about what to do or not to do. They had to make their own choices to save people.
If anybody was to leave the building, the only way to do it was by illegal ways.
If you stand in front of the Schouwburg on the right side, is a long corridor, a fire escape corridor. And we had a key to that corridor, illegally. The first thing we did, we took them from the hall and brought them upstairs. And then we organized an ambulance. And the ambulance came and we brought him out from the office. It looked officially. We brought him out from the long corridor. And then he went with the ambulance away. Yeah.
Suskind's partner, Felix Halverstad, was in charge of forgeries. Halverstad and his team created new identity cards for adults who were escaping.
Forgers at that time saved more people's lives than anybody else. This is amazing what forgers could do.
I was engaged in making falsifications of identity cards. It was easy for me to create identity cards in which, for instance, a new photograph had to be glued in with the faked fingerprint and so on. And I like to do it myself.
My father was an actor, so there were a lot of artists in this resistance group. Because my father knew the theater very well, he played there a lot of times. So he knew there was a window in the back of the theater, and it was blackened, and the Germans obviously didn't know that. And it was a real hidden window. So he opened the window, and during the day he let several people escape. Every day he did that. He did that for half a year, and it became very, very hard for him to make decisions who could go out and who had to stay. In order not to betray themselves, they had to stop. But also he told me that in the last month he did this job, it was very hard for him to choose which one you sent to Westerbork and which one you let go.
For many people in the resistance, the burden of having to make life and death decisions took a heavy toll, and they had to stop. But Walter Suskind was able to carry on.
One of the qualities which allowed him to do this must have been an extraordinarily developed sense of self-control. I think the best way to describe it is a sense of duty not to break.
As the rate of deportations escalated, several resistance groups decided to focus on saving as many children as they could. For these groups, Walter Suskind was the contact who set the process in motion.
We were specialized in hiding children because we thought we have to do one job and good.
You cannot save them all. This is a moral dilemma, thinking, okay, I'm going to save you and not you, and how do you do this?
The real organization of hiding children and taking children away from Schouwburg and Crash, that started after we got a foundling who was called Remy. Mrs. Pimentel gave him that name, and she considered him her child.
Remy was an absolutely beautiful baby with big brown eyes, black hair, and just really adorable.
And aus der Funte fell in love, like a father.
And the Germans absolutely loved this baby, would hold him, which was most unusual.
And he came to check on this child and visit with him all the time. And we thought, well, at least one child will be safe. But he wasn't safe either.
It cost the child his life. Because if Austerfunte didn't like him so much and came every day to see him, we should have taken the child away.
Well, he was sent to Auschwitz.
In the beginning, we didn't get so many children. In the very beginning, people were picked up in the street. But when the big razzias came, it became a different story. We had hundreds a day.
Suskind or one of his helpers would judge families as to the likelihood that the parents were ready to let their children be taken to safe places.
They knew from the list they got which people were going on transport.
We went back and forth very freely in our uniforms. The Germans had a ridiculous respect for uniforms, I guess any kind of uniform.
Walter Suskind and Henriette Pimentel made judgments as to which families would be willing to part with their children and whom they could trust to keep the operation secret.
We, as girls, the 3 girls, would be sent across the street to ask parents, would you leave your children with us for the time that you are gone? We take care that the children will be taken care of.
One of the women had to go across the street and try in secret to contact my parents and ask them, they were going away, and if it was okay for them, if they would leave their daughter here with them, and they would try to take care of that nothing would happen to her.
Well, if you hear that as a parent, you have to think about it. So we gave them a couple of hours to think about it. When we asked them that question, we had to take care that we could find a little space in the corner so we could talk to them secretly. God forbid the Germans would hear it, or somebody else would discuss it with somebody else, etc., etc.
There were those parents who would never be able to bear being separated from their children, and I felt for them.
There were some who decided, yes, let's do that. It won't last so long, so yeah, if you have a nice place for him or her, take him.
To give your child of 6 years old to a boy and a girl about 20, without knowing them, knowing that you maybe never see them again, is unbelievable.
Many times we were allowed to bring the mother over to say goodbye to the child.
I was told by my mother one day that they had to leave and I had to stay, and they had contact with people, and when a certain man in a raincoat and a hat on would give me a sign, I had to follow him, and he would take care of me. The fear is overwhelming.
As a child was being hidden in the confines of the creche, Suskind's team of forgers was making the child's identity cards disappear, both at the Schauberg and in the German Central Office for Jewish Emigration.
Felix Halverstad would remove filing cards with the names of those children that were going to be secreted out. On the night of deportation, the young helpers would fashion what looked like a child in a blanket or something.
And I told them, okay, I will come back at night, just before the transports go, when the people go in the trucks. And don't be shocked, but I will bring you a blanket with a doll inside, or a pillow if we don't have enough dolls anymore. But don't open it. don't show your so-called baby to somebody else. You have your baby and you do as if you carry the child. We took them over the street and we gave them to the parents and they left. Now the children who parents said, okay, I'm willing to give him up, but it was a big boy or a big girl or bigger, 4 or 5 years old, we had to take back to the crash in the afternoon, and those children went upstairs in the attic. And Harry, my husband now, he often sat with those children in the attic to keep them busy and to keep them quiet, that nobody should hear that they were upstairs. They were illegal in the attic, in the crash.
Because these were the kids that were not registered anymore, and they were waiting to go in hiding. We would sit there, we would play with these youngsters. And we would play them, keep them quiet.
That morning I have been watching before the windows and all the people going on transport. It was like on cars, you know, where you put cows on when they go to the slaughtery. They had to stand one next to the other. And all of a moment I saw my parents, and I think I start yelling or crying, and they took me away from the window, yes. I was their only child and treasure, I think.
Those children had to get out of the crash. And again, there came the director and Mr. Suskind in. What to do with those children?
You cannot just put a child on the street.
Children need someone to take care of them. They cannot find a hiding place for themselves.
As more students and adults joined the resistance, efforts increased to move children to safe hiding places as quickly as possible.
Mr. Suskind had his contacts with the underground.
And so is the first time that we knew now we can help children. And Walter was the principal person.
I saw him every week. We kept strict to the business I had to do with him. How many children, what kind of children, what day, and so on. Piet Meerburg was giving them information because that was the man in our contact in Amsterdam.
Nobody gave a child to a stranger. The crash was closed for strangers unless Suskind and Pimentel knew in advance. Mrs. Pimentel would give her instructions to several people, and nobody knew what the other did. Nobody knew what was happening exactly.
When children were designated to be brought out to the underground movement, we put blankets and big bears and things on the cot so that it looked as though a child slept there. You walked straight out and somebody in the dark took the child from you, and I felt I wanted to die, but at the same time I felt happy that the child was safe.
The older children were taken for walks in groups to get some fresh air. It was set up that children would disappear.
Some children were instructed to get out of the line.
They said to me, you have to put on as much clothes as you can. And then we are going to walk. And you are walking in the last row with 3 others. And in the neighborhood of the railway station, you have to walk slower and slower. And we are going on. And then you will at the square before the station, and there are people coming to pick you up.
Sometimes rescuers dressed up in stolen uniforms of the Dutch Nazi police and demanded that nurses hand over children to them.
This man, he went in the underground, he was a Jew himself, and he got a truck one day and clothing from the black politie. He dressed himself as black, Dutch black politie, with the big boots and he came in front of the crash. And he ordered children to get out of there and to get in, like a German, like an SS'er. But these children went to, I don't know whether you ever heard the name Bogart. They went to the Haarlemmermeer and they were hidden. But this could not happen often because it became far too dangerous to do all those things.
Soon, Henriette Pimentel discovered that she had an ally at the Christian school for teachers next door.
Niet de crash, there was a school. A Christian school for teachers. And behind the crash and behind the school, there was a garden.
We were neighbors. There was no separation between the garden of the crash and the garden of the school. In the garden of the crash, I have for the first time met Walter Suskind.
They took me to a school next to the crash, and I know that the head of that other school was involved, and there was probably this man with the raincoat and the hat.
And they came from the crash in the garden of the crash, from the garden of the crash to the garden of the school, and through the door of the school we brought her outside to addresses to help these children.
Streetcars would stop in the street between the Hollandse Schouwburg and the crash.
On our side, there was no guards. If the streetcar stopped, the SS couldn't see the door. The housemaster told me I could go, and I went to the right.
I met a very big girl. She was a head higher than I was, in the nurse clothing. And she said, just wait a minute, I will choose one. That was very, for me it was remarkable that she still wanted to choose one. And then she came back with a baby. She said, you must go to the garden, back garden, and there you will find a hole in the hedge. If you go through that hole, you come in the school, and then you can go out. So I went out, and with the little child in my arms, there was a tram, and I jumped the tram, and I went straight to the south of the Amsterdam.
And we talked with the head nurse, and we said, well, we will go with the children, but you go and look out of in the street if you see the railway coming, because we want to go out the door with the children when the streetcar is driving on, and then we take the child in our arm and must to the corner where the car stopped. And we did. In the streetcar, all the people who were sitting and have seen what we done and laughed, and nobody told something. The Dutch people weren't so, they were afraid for the Germans, but they were not against helping people. And if they see that somebody else did, they find it very nice.
The little babies, we often gave a drop of wine just a spoon, teaspoonful. They get a drop of wine and they sleep.
I was saved by perhaps students. I was brought by a suitcase and a bag of potatoes.
It was not so difficult to get them out. Don't forget, the German people who were guarding the Schouwburg were not guarding the children. That was a big mistake of the Germans. They should have put someone in the crash.
The difficult part was also, do we have addresses for the children?
In the beginning, we had no addresses, but there were some of these groups were very clever in foster parent hunting, we called it.
So what the organizations did was find addresses all over the country, homes of people where these children could lodge.
And so we were picked up by 2 students, and we were with 8 children and going by train to Limburg. In the train it was a bit risky because there were Jewish boys and they looked very Jewish.
By train we went to the south of Holland, in Limburg. They took me to a most wonderful family in Limburg, and I have stayed there for 3 years, till after the war. I was one of their family, and I'm still one of their family.
The underground came in and told either Suskind or told the director, we can use a child with long blonde hair.
Yes, my foster parents, the Van Vliets, had asked for a blonde girl, a blonde baby girl, and on the evening of the 14th of October they were told at 7:30 you get a baby. And there I came, and they opened the blanket and they saw a Jewish boy with black hair, but not a blonde girl. But I opened my arms and I smiled to my mother, and it was okay. She never said anything about a blonde girl. It was okay. I was a boy.
I was told that I was a child from Rotterdam, which was bombed by then. And children from Rotterdam were taken into safety. And as I had the luck to be blonde and fairly light eyes, it was very easily accepted that I was one of the kids from Rotterdam, not particularly a Jewish kid. But I knew very well that when people asked me, that I had to tell that.
I was hidden in the crash on the top of the, there were all small rooms for the nurses and for the people who were caring for the children. From September, when I went out of the crash in 43, I went to Tegele in Limburg, just close to Venlo. And there I was sitting till the end of the war. By Catholic, very nice people.
I went to 9 other places until the end of the war. Nobody remembered even my birthday. And that was the first birthday I wasn't at home anymore.
So they went from address to address. Every time, you know, they had the feeling. They had, of course, no idea why were they sent away. So it was not only from the parents given away, but also from family to family. Why are they giving me away? Haven't I been nice? Did I misbehave?
You're a child of 8 years old. You were taken away and put into this family who were wonderful for me. And I think it was not easy for them to take me.
finding addresses for Jewish children. Not anyone will do that. I think that if the members of these resistance organizations asked 10 homes, 10 families, would you hide a Jewish child? Maybe 7 or 6 of them would say no, because the danger was too high.
The game was not only dangerous for us, the game was dangerous for the child, and the game was dangerous for the foster parents. If they were caught with a Jewish child, they would be treated as a Jewish person, and they would be sent to the concentration camps. So they risked their lives.
It had to be kept secret. That was even more true of the resistance groups, who never knew the real name of anybody else and knew as little as possible about what other people were doing.
You were not aware of the details. They were said, do this, do that, do so. You don't ask what other people did, because the more you knew, you have no idea that the more dangerous it was. Because you could be tortured, and what you didn't know, you couldn't tell.
A lot of these resistance fighters were cowboys. They really loved the tension, the adventure. They had guts, really. They had balls.
You need luck. You have 80, that we survived is 80% luck.
All these guys must have been very idealistic, risking their own lives to save other people.
When Holland was considered Judenrein, meaning cleansed of Jews, it was time to close the crèche.
In July 1943, director Henriette Pimentel's name appeared on a deportation list, and she made the choice to go to Westerbork with children from the crèche. From there, she was sent to Auschwitz, where she was gassed.
I still think of her very fondly and very sadly.
To me, the connection Pimentel, Suskind, will always be there. One couldn't have done it without the other.
I mourn her really deeply.
There were not many children anymore. Amsterdam was really empty.
On September 29th, 1943, the crèche was closed for good.
Suskind's wife and daughter had been picked up months earlier and were being held at Camp Westerbork. Walter had to choose whether to go underground with a false identity or to travel to Westerbork to try to rescue his family.
It was his own decision. He didn't want to leave his wife and child alone in Westerbork. I could understand it. I knew, and I was absolutely sure, that if he came to Westerbork, he would be put on the first transport, what exactly happened. And I tried to convince him not to go to Westerbork.
In the end, he decided to go and join his wife and child.
He was sent to Theresienstadt. And from Theresienstadt, he went to Auschwitz. But he had that letter of Austerfunte, and he tried to save him when he was put on the train.
Austerfunte had given to Walter in friendship a letter that basically stated, this Jew, Walter Suskind, is a good Jew. Walter tried to use the letter to hand it to the camp commander. Jews were not supposed to address Germans, not even look at them. Suskind tried to get out of the line and get the letter to the camp commander, when a capo, a Jewish policeman, kicked him back in line and prevented him from giving the letter to the camp commander. And that was the end, where they were all shipped to Auschwitz. The whole family, Hannah, his wife, his mother, his daughter Yvonne, and his mother-in-law were all immediately sent to the left in the selection process on arrival in Auschwitz-Birkenau, and immediately were sent to the gas chamber, where Walter was sent to the right, meaning he was going to be put to work. The end came later. There were two versions about how Walter died. One was that when the Russians came near Auschwitz, the camp was evacuated and everybody was walking, and many people who fell down because of the cold and exhaustion were shot, and that Walter died there. But the more horrid version of his death came from the story that the Dutch inmates of Auschwitz killed him because many people never knew the secret operation of rescue and escape that Walter organized, and only saw him as the man in charge of deportation.
He was hated because it was people who did not understand what was happening.
And it must have been also very difficult at the same time for lots of Jews to see that he was so familiar with Ausderfunten. And at the same time, he couldn't tell everybody what he in fact was doing.
And he was loved and honored by others who somehow came into it and felt what he really was doing.
It's important to look what he did. And every time when I look to persons like Suskind, I always ask myself the question, what should you have done? And the answer is very, very difficult.
Here's this man who should be honored, who was such an absolute hero as a Jew. To do what he did is quite unbelievable.
After all this what happened, there was only one way for him to go with the rest. To conclude his life, because I don't think he could have ever lived and think back of all the things what happened.
Walter Suskind's death came just 3 months before the end of the war. On May 5, 1945, the Germans surrendered and Holland was liberated. Those Jews who survived hoped to rebuild their lives.
We were dancing on the streets and feasting, and that went on for quite a time.
When we came back to Holland, all we did was party. It was forgetting, not talking about it, living on and trying to just move.
All the students were feasting, getting drunk, drinking gin from water glasses. So in the morning, everyone was lying on the ground, quite drunk. And that went on for weeks and weeks.
We just wanted to live, move on, those of us who could move on and make a life for ourselves.
When I came out of the war, I went to Eindhoven, and there, aunts were waiting, parents were waiting, friends were waiting, and then all these people were fetched. And then all of a sudden I stood there, and I didn't know what to do.
The family is very small, because nobody survived, just my uncle and a cousin in 6th grade or something like that.
After the war was the most difficult time for me. I knew, of course, that my uncle and aunt were not my parents. Well, I didn't dare to ask them more because I thought it was so embarrassing for them.
Nobody in Sneek knew that I was a Schachner. It was always Freddy van Vliet. I got their name in 1957. And I was adopted when I was 18.
I found a family in Amsterdam who have known my parents before the war. And they have adopted me after the war. So I had new parents.
I still think about a card which I once received from my mother, what she put out of the train for me. I got it. I got it somewhere. I don't know exactly, but I lost it. I don't have it anymore. So, you know, I'm thinking about it, why I don't have it anymore. You know, there are small things, you know, crazy things. As crazy as I broke my cello in two parts.
I'm sure that a lot of people didn't know in the beginning of the war how it would end and how this anti-Semitism would end, that it really would end in the murder of 6 million Jews.
After the war, there were very strong feelings about the actions of the Jewish Council. Was it right to have a Jewish council? The Jews, most of the Jews who came back and were deported by the Jewish council, said, well, they saved their own life, and they deported the other Jews.
It was a rotten time, it was a horrible time. Things were required of people that were horrendous. No, most people were not prepared for that. Most people tried to save their life if they could. There are very few people who survived this horrendous period without feeling guilty about something that either they did or something they did not do.
People were scared. I can imagine, no one is born a hero.
What I could do and what I had to do, I did.
We have not done enough. We have done something, but not enough.
I never felt that as something special I did. In the contrary, later on I thought, oh, how stupid, could have done so much.
Pleased, absolute no admiration. God has placed me on this school that I could help them. That is the work of God, it's not my work.
I say forget about God, if there is one in the first place, and I doubt it. All the evil and all the things we're struggling against and don't seem to make much headway is people. So we have to focus on people, forget about prayer and God helping us, because it hasn't made any difference. We have to focus on what people do. I think that Walter Suskind was a very good example of that.
Thankfully, there are single individuals who have humanitarian feelings and the necessary willpower and strength and mental self-control to help some of us to get out of these very dangerous situations alive. And one of these persons, obviously, is Walter Suskind.
I'm not going to somewhere to remembrances. I don't. I remember every day.
They left me. They really left me, and later I realized how lonely that feeling was.
Some people say, well, how is it possible that a mother can give away her child? But she did it because she thought that's the only chance that he can survive. That is very brave of her.
If I see my mother walking on her knees, I see it still, not every day, not every hour, but I see it a lot of times in my thoughts, you know. And you hear these steps from these Germans, you know, that's terrible.
For a very long time, I was very angry with my parents. Not so long ago, I learned that it wasn't right to be angry with them.
I think it was quite difficult when our children turned 8 years old, because I always thought I wouldn't be able to leave my children when I would have been taken away. I would have kept them with me.
God forbid something like this would happen again, I would never leave my children. I would take them with me. I would never leave them.
Once I had the grandchild in my arms and she was 4, 5 months old. And then I thought of Rachel. I was also 5 months old, and then she gave me away. And then knowing perhaps that they never would see me again. That was a terrible moment also for me. I cried then a lot, and my daughter said, why do you cry? Well, I told her, and then we cried all together.
My oldest son is a second-generation victim. He is always on the line, on the telephone. Papa, Mama, it's good. Do I need to come? You know, they have a guilty feeling, but you know that they live in a very good way, and they leave their old parents here. That they feel guilty still.
I discovered in 1996, 1st of February, some cousins of my father in New York and also in Miami, and I spoke to them, and that was very, very amazing because I thought I was the only Schachner on the world.
After I married and after children were born, I became more and more aware of being Jewish, and I wanted to be proud of that. And well, I did.
This is a picture of 3 years ago with my son, with his wife and the 2 children. And now I am in the board of the synagogue and in the board of the Witzo and in the board of a charity fund. I felt it's like an obligation to all the persons who aren't there anymore, who are murdered. And so I try to keep things together.
I am married in '58, have 2 wonderful sons and 7 grandchildren. So it was really worthwhile surviving, getting out. Yes.
Sometimes I think when I see my children, I see the grandchild, then I think they tried to kill us, but we succeed. We survived, and yes, here am I, and my children are the grandchildren of Salomon and Rachel. And now they are great-grandchildren, and this story goes on and on and on. That part of the family does not stop.
I realized what a courageous fact it was that my parents left me with somebody unknown. But they gave me, by doing that, they gave me my life for the second time.
You will come over it, but you never will forget it. You live with it and you go dying with it. And you never forget.
We must remember. And not only remember, we have to care.
Suskind.